Thank you very much, Matthew. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. To start, I'll ask each of the panelists to take 1 minute to present themselves. So, Przemek, up to you.
Hi, I'm Przemek. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Blue Horizon. We're an impact investment firm investing across the sustainable food ecosystem, all the way from upstream genetics, water technologies, crop protection through products, all the way to non-food products, which Eric Schmidt is trying to call bioeconomy nowadays.
Thank you. Jack?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jack. I spent some years on transformation and business development at La Poste, the French postal operator. Then moved on to the French government shareholding agency, where I was in charge of a portfolio of industrial companies in the auto industry, aerospace, defense. And for the past 4 years, I was chief of staff at the Ministry of Energy and Environment here in France, before joining Argos with you 6 months ago to launch what we call Argos Climate Action, which is a decarbonization fund.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Franz Thielmann from Era Partners. We are a decarbonization fund as well. So we invest in companies which are already producing a decarb product or are producing a service which enables decarbonization. And so our thing is to take small green companies and make them bigger.
Thank you very much, Franz. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm Christian Couturier. I co-founded Carbometrics after 20 years as a partner and investment committee member of Astorg. Co-founded the company with Corinne Bach and Marie David. So to set the scene, gentlemen, could you comment on the importance of Decarbonization Fund? Jack, to start with you, I think you have some figures you would like to share with us.
Yes, gladly, Christian. When we speak about carbon neutrality, reaching the objectives that have been set, let's just talk about Europe. At European level, you've all heard of the Fit for 55 package and the objective of reducing by 55% emissions by the end of this decade. People don't always have in mind what it implies in terms of amounts of investments needed. Just to give you a few numbers, what is needed is around 4 to 5 GDP points, so 700 to 800 billion euros each year, to be rerouted mostly from the traditional economy towards making the economy greener, and some additional investment to also make Europe greener. That really is I think we can say, unprecedented amount of investments that is needed. Hence the title of this panel, the largest redeployment of capital in history. It probably is. 700 or 800 billion euros is more than what was done after COVID at European level, the resilience and recovery facility that you'll remember a few years back. We will need to do that each year until 2030 to reach our objectives. And a lot of money has been flowing towards green technologies and renewables. Less money for the moment into transforming our existing economy, all the companies of our everyday life, and making them greener. And that is also needed investments in that direction.
Thank you, Jack. Franz and Przemek, would you say that decarbonization funds today remain niche, or are they going to become mainstream in the coming years? What's your view?
So I don't know if you remember software. There was this thing that private equity didn't invest in. And there were the few really small, really specialist firms who dared. They were called Vista, Thoma Bravo, and they were really niche. Now, 15 years later, they're running 15 billion funds, and nobody's calling them niche anymore. While all the big guys, you know, the CVCs, KKRs, Blackstones of this world, they all invest in software. It's absolutely core to what they do. So I think we'll see the same. We will see climate tech become completely mainstream. All of the big investors will do it. But hopefully the folks who started early have built the database, have built the network, have built the skill set, will create really big investment organizations and will generate really good returns to their investors.
Thank you. Franz, do you want to
Yeah, I
comment?
share that. I think this is really a sector play. So, we're three of us in different ways looking to be sector specialists. And I think all the big firms are building or will build sector specialists a long time. So, because there's just so much to be done.
You have three different ways to manage the issue. Shemek, you're more on backing breakthrough technologies. Jack, you're more on moving from gray to green. And you, Franz, you would say you move small green to big green. Would you have each of you some examples of the type of investments you're doing?
Sure, yeah. Just to give you one example, for example, I sit on the board of a German company called PureGlobe. So our business collects or buys used motor oil, so the stuff that comes out of your car. And we have a refinery technology which is the only one in the world which is able to produce high-grade, re-refined motor oil, so sort of grade 3. And that has a carbon impact which is about 70% better than the carbon impact of taking oil out of the ground, then using it in a car, and then burning it. So it's sort of definitely in our scope. And we've got 2 refineries right now, and the demand we see worldwide is for above 50 refineries to be built. So that's exactly just an example of how big the need is and how big the opportunity is also to invest.
Thank you.
So we are still raising the fund. We haven't started investing. We just launched this new strategy 2 months ago. So I can't speak about investments yet, but I can speak about the opportunities that we're seeing. And it's quite interesting to say there are a lot of sectors where we feel that making a company the greenest in its sector, the most decarbonized in its sector, can bring a lot of value and a lot of market share and valuation for these companies. We see it in the auto industry or aeronautics. We see it in chemicals. We see it in agriculture or agri-food businesses. And in the chemicals industry, it's also very clear, and there are clear valuation premiums for the greenest companies already.
Okay.
So we've done over 80 deals or 80 investments in sustainable food system, and a lot of them were about replacing animals. So Impossible Foods, Clara, Gelter, the likes, generally cutting the carbon footprint of animal agriculture by 90% or so. But the latest investment we did from the growth fund is a company called Tropic, and they use pretty cutting-edge genetic technology, so basically CRISPR derivatives, to develop disease-resistant varieties of bananas, coffee, and rice. Because if anybody here likes coffee, I got bad news. You're going to run out of it because of climate change. If you like bananas, I got bad news because there are 2 diseases that are existential threats to banana production worldwide. And this company is developing varieties which are naturally resistant to them.
Thank you, Shemek. When we discuss decarbonation, it has to do with externalities and additional costs related to externalities. I was wondering, have LPs changed criteria when they decide to invest in decarbonation GPs? What's your view? And I would be interested to have each of you's view on that.
Sure. I think we are lucky to have some very good LPs. We're very sort of impressed by the people who've trusted us with their money. They are very demanding people. They are very top-level institutions globally. And the way they look at it, because we were discussing actually earlier today, one of them, they're ready to invest in a Fund 1 which has a reasonable path to producing very high returns if it's impact because of the additional returns, which are externalities. So that's the risk they take. But they are still extremely demanding in terms of returns. So they're not looking for low-level returns. Does that address your question?
Yeah.
Agreed. And I think timing is everything here, as with many other things. And we are at this very interesting moment where climate is going mainstream. So if you look 5 years ago, the LPs in that space were really just individual visionaries, like Bill Gates specifically with Breakthrough Energy Ventures. By now, what we're seeing is it is about to go mainstream. So we're having discussions with some of the biggest sovereign wealth funds and pension plans on the planet, but this is still baby steps. And so we need to prove to them a few things. We need to prove to them that we can generate returns as good as mainstream investing. We need to prove to them that we can actually calculate impact in a correct way, or at least directionally correct, because it will get adjusted. And we can prove to them that this is here to stay. And I think once these three things are ticked, then the amount of capital that will get deployed into climate will be almost unlimited, because we'll all miss Florida when it's gone. And this is when it's going to go mainstream, which is unfortunately is going to happen at some stage. But for now, this is still early days for a lot of the big LPs.
I would give the same feedback. I think there's most investors don't want to compromise on returns, and they want the same type of returns on impact investing as traditionally. For Argus Climate Action, we see it's quite interesting interest from two different sorts of investors. I would say our traditional investors who are used to investing in private equity, who are really getting more and more interested, as you were saying, Shemek, in these environmental topics, and they feel that it's going to be a long learning curve, and they feel sort of reassured to go along that curve with people that come from the buyout space and that already sort of have that experience. And from the other side of the spectrum, we see people coming from what I would call the impact world, who also find it interesting to see that you can have the sort of risk-reward profile of private equity, while having at the same time a strong and measurable environmental impact. So interest from different sides of the spectrum, but always the same, no compromise. It's and environmental performance and financial performance, not or.
Okay. And here a message to LPs in the audience. Don't be shy when looking at potential investments in decarbonization funds. Do you think that new regulation could potentially accelerate the interest of LPs in decarbonization? Or should accelerate?
So betting on regulation has one critical problem, and that's that of timing again. So we all know that it's going to get worse before it gets better. We all know where the world is in terms of climate trajectory. We all know that the extreme weather events are not extreme, that's just new normal. So at some stage, the regulators will step in because people will demand it. Now, it will be too late in many respects, and it may be later than we think. So we had a chat about it. None of us are underwriting regulatory changes as part of the investment thesis, because those could happen at the wrong time or principally later. But I think being on the right side of history is an important thing. And we've seen that through COVID. Discontinuities bring acceleration of certain trends. We know which way the trend is going. Yeah? There's nobody in this audience who thinks the world isn't getting warmer and that it's not going to create issues. If you are, that's the wrong conference. So it's just how quickly. And so we've seen that through COVID, that there were trends into online commerce, for example, and we got 2 decades worth of growth in 6 months. So unfortunately, with climate, any disaster happening will do the same thing.
Maybe just to complete your answer, I think being in a position where you depend on regulatory changes for your business model to work is probably not a comfortable position to be in. But reversely, being not resilient to regulatory changes, for instance, the introduction of carbon taxes, which will arrive at some point in most sectors and in most geographies, but probably in Europe first, is not a comfortable position either. So I think what all three of us are trying to do in our different businesses is to make sure that they don't need regulatory changes, but they're ready to adapt, and that they're ready to be more resilient in case they occur.
Okay. Franz, would you like to?
Nothing to add.
Okay, so message is we need to expect returns without regulation, and regulation can be cherry on the cake, and we need to be in a position to adapt. When it comes to
not really. I don't think it's a cherry on the cake. We should all, as citizens, ask for more regulation. It's just that we can't, as investors, bet on regulation.
Okay, thank you, Franz. When it comes to decarbonization, there's an issue on measure. So I would like to ask to each of you, how do you actually measure that you are actually decarbonizing, reducing carbon footprint of the companies or through the companies you invest in?
So we at ERA, we generally invest in companies that have an existing product, and one of the key investment committee criteria is that the product should be 60% better in terms of carbon footprint. So that there are different methods, and we know some very good companies that help us measure, so thank you. But it's really important to measure upfront. And then once you know that your product is 60% better, then you keep making it better and you keep improving. But it's not about measuring how you've changed the company different to some of my neighbors. It's really how much you grow the company that has is a measure of the impact you have.
Yeah, I mean, we look across a number of impact metrics. Climate is probably the most important, but we also look at stuff like human health, biodiversity, and it gets progressively more difficult. So even measuring climate impact between CO2, methane, all of the other gases is difficult. Plug for Christian here. But I think the one thing we need to admit, this is baby steps. We are in early days of accounting for impact. We're in early days of standardizing the measurement, which is why the early entrance into this category should have a bit of a lead time over everybody else. But just like accounting took thousands of years to form, or at least hundreds of years to form, and it's still very far from perfect, as anybody here knows, this system of measuring externalities, for lack of a better word, will not be perfect anytime soon. But it's important to get started. It's important to take those things into account because we know they matter and we know the market or regulation, but let's say the market for now, will price them in at some stage. We're just not clear when.
I think your question is a good one because measuring your environmental impact is key to making sure that you're having real impact. We're coming from a world where the first people starting to have interest in these topics had a very subjective approach, and we're saying we're going to do more social inclusion, we're going to promote diversity, we're going to make sure that we reduce pollution overall, but without any figures. And we all know that what's not measured is not really monitored, and that your impact probably is not very sustainable over time. So having a set of indicators is absolutely essential. We have for Argus Climate Action, we will have 16 KPIs that we will be reporting to for our investors. But at the same time, I think if you have 16 and that you set objectives on 16 and you really want to put the same focus on all of them, you're not going to have this. You're not going to put the right effort on each one, and you can't follow 16 objectives with as much intensity at the same time. So we've chosen to have a clear focus on one, deciding that climate change mitigation is the most urgent of all the topics. So of course we'll measure air pollution, water pollution, impact on biodiversity, etc. But our main KPI, and the one that we will link our carried interest to, is the reduction of the CO2 intensity of our portfolio companies. And we set a quantitative objective of 7.5% a year reduction in that CO2 intensity of our portfolio.
And you systematically measure scope 3, so indirect emission as well.
We systematically include scope 1 and 2. And for scope 3, we include it every time we can. What does it mean every time we can? It means every time it's measurable, that your supplier is able to provide you with the carbon footprint of the goods he's supplying. And the same for the downstream, the way that your customers are using the goods that you've provided them. every time we can measure it, and every time we have the feeling that the company we invest in has a way of improving the carbon footprint and of having an action on this carbon footprint, we will include it. So in most cases, we will be able to include Scope 3 upstream and downstream in our measurement.
And I can assure you that Scope 3 can be measured and actioned.
That's where we need all sorts of providers to help us measure.
One question on new practices, maybe. Are there practices that you would like to share with the audience on new ways to incentivize teams, managements of companies? Franz would like to share what you're doing at ARA on carried interest, on management package, on
No, I think the tools we use are very standard. I think the way we help management teams is specific because of who we are. We're an industrial investor, so we have very big teams. About a third of the total ERA team is people who are there to help our companies grow and who are people who've built factories in the past and know how to design them and build them and manage suppliers. And our value add to the economy is really to build these new decarbonized factories that we need to sort of keep living in an advanced society way, but have less of a carbon impact. So that's the way we look. It's not an incentive, it's just the way we think we can add value.
I mean, we link a portion of carry to achieving impact objectives. So it's still returns and impact. So obviously, no returns equals no carry. So that's an easy one. But we do link a portion of carry explicitly to hitting the impact objectives.
And for Argos Climate Action, we also link 1/4 of our carry to the environmental performance, to the indicator I was mentioning earlier, the CO2 intensity. And what we've decided to do is to create a reserve for 1/4 of the carried. So 1/4 will be put aside, and at the end of the fund, we will measure our performance. If we haven't reached our objective, our environmental objective, which of course we hope we will, but if we don't reach it, this reserve will be mobilized to compensate, to invest in some nature-based or maybe tech-based solutions to compensate on a ton-per-ton basis every extra ton that has been emitted over the lifetime of the fund compared to our objective. And we have also declined this alignment of interests with the managements and in the companies that we're looking at the moment. We're discussing that with the management teams. We want their management packages also to have part of it linked to their environmental performance to make sure that everybody's totally aligned.
Thank you. And what about bonds? Are you using decarbonation-linked bonds to, or not really?
No, not really. No, we're
Okay.
sort of more entrepreneurial than that.
Not so far. They've only just started to exist, and I think it's a very early market for those bonds.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there many questions in the audience? Would you like to share views, insights, or do you have questions?
I do, and there's no mic, but I just wanted to ask the question. It feels to me that, first of all, thank you very much. It's really enlightening. It feels to me this is a Eurocentric perspective. I'd like to hear your ideas about, given the geopolitics that are falling apart in globalization markets, are other countries following similar leads in investments? How is the US doing? Yes. Do I have to repeat all that? Did you hear it?
Yeah.
Do I
We heard
repeat
you.
it?
I think
Do I repeat
I can start taking
Yeah.
the question. I think your question is, do we have the same happening in the US and in China
and
and
how
elsewhere?
big and so on.
Can't comment on China, even though they are the market leader in terms of solar panel production, and they are very big. Definitely the US, despite what we may think here, and we're a US fund originally, the fact that we're the only Fund 3 in decarb buyouts, and we're a US fund, sort of shows that the US has been doing something. But more broadly, if you look at solar power, wind power, Texas is huge. This is a red state. This is not a left-wing state. But they just think, okay, We did it with oil, let's do it with wind and solar. So a lot is happening over there as well, and obviously the recent initiatives, the IRA Act, this is really very big in terms of what it'll do to U.S. industry. We may not like it in Europe because it has some very sort of protectionist overtones, but it has a big impact. And my personal thought is that Chinese authorities are doing significant steps, and that just don't want to be tied internationally, but they're doing stuff because they're aware of the problem as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Our strategy is completely global, but half of the portfolio is in the US. And while the US LPs have really different notation, talk about impact to US LP and they blank out because for them it's sustainability as far as they're allowed to go. But actually on the company side, it's an extremely vibrant ecosystem. And if you look at what Biden's administration has put through, this is squarely into the bioeconomy and bringing production that was all over the world onshore. There is absolutely the protectionist vibe to it, but this will massively accelerate the industries we invest in. So as much as Europe is more focused on sustainability, we are frankly worried about European countries falling behind US in terms of actually creating the conditions for bioeconomy companies to flourish.
Thank you, Shemek. Matthew, do you have time for one more question? There was another question. Yes, go.
If I may, so thank you for the panel. Thank you also for Astorg people switching to the real economy and decarbonating, doing the decarb stuff. I think you need to do a much more good PR because you guys are the rock star and you're pretty well unknown. The field of decarb and climate tech is almost unknown, I feel, at least in France. Okay, so I think the PR has to go to the side of your goal, which is purposeful and very strong. So my question to you now is, what can you do to open people's minds to the importance of climate tech? Because we know 50% of the job will be done with current technology, like green cars, batteries, blah, blah, blah. And the other 50%, more or less, okay, is going to be done with new technology, not just retrofit and stuff, but technology that we don't know yet, okay? So I think you guys need a PR plan. The mic is for you.
So
Agreed.
30 seconds to answer.
Agreed. We should do much more PR. I think you're right.
But if I may be slightly more optimistic on that, I think the big changes happen when you have a bunch of big trends coinciding together. And for climate to work, for climate investing to work, you need a wall of money coming in. Jack has elaborated on that. But you need need PR, but you also need talent. And I'm not sure if the four of us are anywhere near the rock stars that you described, which I'm thankful for. But what we are seeing is a massive influx of talent. So we've been able to recruit people that I frankly didn't think we would be able to recruit because they wanted purpose in life. And these are people who worked for Blackstone, CVC, Partners Group, and the like. They walked away from these jobs to do something that actually has meaning to them. And the same is happening in our portfolio companies. Now, it's helped by the fact that all of the big tech decided to fire tens of thousands of people. But if they move away from doing the next Candy Crush to actually solving the world's problems, that is actually pretty good for all of us.
And clearly, being more sustainable attracts the best talents. So I think we can end on that optimistic note.
Yeah, it's a very good conclusion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Franz, Jack, Shemek.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.